This guy was once a revered hero, but he willingly fell from grace to become a lowly prison guard. All because heroes can't easily execute people, but a prison guard can carry out executions. Not long ago he captured the most notorious white-haired criminal. The cost, however, was the total loss of his entire team. At that moment he had a chance to execute the criminal on the spot. He couldn't bring himself to do it. He had promised his teammates to bring the criminal to justice, and that became the decision he regretted the most. The captured white-haired man was sentenced to execution by law. He was temporarily held in a heavily guarded Lu Cruz maximum prison. At home this guy watched the news alone. Apart from the verdict on the white-haired man, the news also covered the hero's funeral ceremony tonight. He listened grimly to the broadcast. At that moment someone walked over and turned off the TV. It was his older brother. He is also a prison guard. The man looked at his brother in silence. He regretted not personally ending the white-haired man. However, his brother advised him to listen to his comrade's guidance. The words of his former comrades still echoed in his mind. A hero's duty is to save lives, not take them. Even the most ruthless criminals should be judged by the law. No matter the circumstances, you must not kill. Although the man was dissatisfied, he still abided by the promise he had made. His brother also believed that criminals should face judgment by the law, and then executed by the prison guards. Finally his brother informed him that the white-haired man would be executed next week. The two of them then attended the hero's funeral together. At this point everything seemed to have reached an end, but the man never expected that the following week he'd be attending his brother's funeral instead. In that moment he was filled with despair, unsure of what had happened. Why was the man sentenced to execution unharmed, while his brother the executioner was killed? He sat silently by his brother's altar, until a sudden voice interrupted him. It was the warden of Lu Cruz prison. The warden handed him a tablet. On it was the execution record of the white-haired man. During the moment his brother carried out the execution order, Lu Cruz prison unexpectedly lost power. At the same time the white-haired man unleashed a powerful electromagnetic shock. Several execution guards were blown away on the spot. Freed from his restraints, the white-haired man killed them all. The protagonist stared at the screen in disbelief. At the same time the warden explained that the situation was dire, because aside from the white-haired man, every prisoner in the facility had been released. The only bit of luck was that the prison was sealed in time, preventing the escape of the death row inmates. None of the guards inside had a chance to make it out. At this point the protagonist gritted his teeth and demanded to know who caused the electromagnetic pulse. However, the warden had no idea. The warden's purpose for coming here was clear: to ask the protagonist to help clean up Lu Cruz prison's chaos. The protagonist was more than willing to assist, but he had one condition. Since his comrades had said a hero's duty is to save lives, and his brother believed only the law could judge humanity, with executions carried out solely by prison guards, then in Lu Cruz prison, he would no longer be a hero. He would become a prison guard. I am prison guard Xu Zhongliu. Please take care of me, inmates. Thinking he was still the same as before, afraid to kill, they rushed at him one after another. But the protagonist swung a single punch, clearing a path right through the middle. The white-haired man laughed maniacally. You finally came. The protagonist adjusted his clothes. From now on, executions will commence. Upon hearing that the guards would carry out death sentences, the death row inmates were enraged. Many argued they were only responsible for a few murders, so why should they be killed? This is dehumanizing us. The foolish ones were still clamoring for lawyers, while the smarter ones prepared to escape. Taking advantage of the distraction, a green-haired man teleported behind the protagonist, thinking freedom was within reach. He underestimated the protagonist. The protagonist coldly turned and delivered a powerful kick, taking the green-haired man down instantly. The scene left everyone in shock. The room fell silent in an instant. At this moment the protagonist offered a choice: either return to your cells with a collar or die. Seeing hesitation among the inmates, a voice suddenly emerged from the crowd. Of course I choose the latter. The man declared, if we're going to die anyway, why not take a chance? After all, this choice is far too unfair to us. But in response to his mockery, protagonist calmly replied, this is the last kindness I'll show you. Realizing the guard was serious, the prisoners began to tremble in fear. Just then a loud shout erupted from one of the men. Everyone turned to look at him in shock. The man said, heroes are nothing to fear. As long as we kill him we'll be free. The protagonist recognized the man instantly. So it's you, huh? Trash, the warden mentioned. Before coming here, the warden had briefed the protagonist on the situation. Lu Cruz prison categorizes criminals based on their level of danger. The continent has fallen into peril. Of course the actual enemies we'll face won't be this many. The prisoners were nothing but a disorganized mess. If given the chance they'd stab each other in the back. But on this floor they had rallied around one person. Hilrizon, a reinforcement type ability user who amplifies others through sound. Looking at the man before him, the protagonist recited his crimes. Murdering 7 citizens and 1 rank 2 hero. However, the man corrected him. Actually it was 10. The female hero was carrying twins. The protagonist glared coldly at the man's disgusting smirk. Fine, then let's take this even more seriously. He called the warden. Is this prison sturdy enough? He asked. The warden gave a firm confirmation. Hearing this, the protagonist felt reassured. Good, no need to hold back my strength then. The man across from him assumed he was bluffing. After all, compared to other high-ranking heroes, protagonist was practically unknown. This made them grow increasingly arrogant. As Hilrizon activated his ability, all the prisoners were empowered. They charged at the protagonist in a frenzy, but with just one kick, he sent the first few rows flying backward. Then the protagonist switched to serious mode. With a single punch, the prisoners scattered like petals in the wind. When the protagonist landed, behind him lay a mountain of corpses, not a single survivor. The executions on the first floor were complete. Next, only the solitary cells remained. As the protagonist walked, he had lost count of how many he had killed. Even when encountering a few stragglers, he kindly gave them a choice. Put on a collar or die. However, not a single person chose the collar. Typically they charged at him, and then they died. Of course there were a few who thought themselves clever. They pretended to surrender and agreed to wear the collar, hoping to make the protagonist lower his guard. Then they launched a surprise attack. But they failed to account for the difference in strength. Their full-force strikes didn't even scratch the protagonist. At this moment the protagonist recalled something his teammate once said. Those non-physical ability users are so pitiful. All they can do is go pew-pew from afar, never experiencing the thrill of crushing someone with their own hands. So the protagonist decided to experience the thrill of landing punches. It turned out to be quite satisfying. After dealing with a small fry, he arrived at the final solitary cell. Standing before him was an old acquaintance, Chuck Feld. Back in the early days of the Hero League they had captured him. Due to his heinous crimes, even when facing execution he remained arrogant and unrepentant. Protagonist had wanted to end him on the spot, but his saintly team captain had stopped him. Though deeply frustrated at the time, the protagonist had no choice but to walk away. Now meeting this scumbag again, the protagonist kindly gave him a choice. Of course the result was predictable. Seeing this, the protagonist wasted no words. He slashed through Feld like lightning. But Feld remained unscathed. It turned out the figure was just an illusion. Feld began to monologue. He said he enjoyed killing people, because he wanted to be eternally etched in their memories. Even after they died they would never forget him. And he remembered every single one of them. He could even make them reappear. As he spoke he attempted to manifest a victim. But before he could, his arm fell off. The protagonist watched him calmly. As expected of someone in solitary confinement. You sure know how to talk. But it seems like you're incapable of dodging my attacks. At this point Feld knew he would die here. Before dying he had one last question. Do you even remember how many people you've killed along the way? The protagonist replied, there's no need to remember trash like you. But just as he finished speaking, his fallen comrades suddenly reappeared before his eyes. The pink-haired saintly teammate once again began pleading with him not to kill. Seeing this, Feld thought he might survive after all. But little did he know it only fueled the protagonist's fury. The belief that you can't kill had ultimately cost his brother's life. Without hesitation the protagonist split them apart without mercy. His face was dark and grim. Anything else you want to try? The protagonist spoke coldly. So it's just illusions after all? Hearing this, Feld's eyes widened in shock. The next moment he followed suit, split in half. With his last breath Feld looked at the protagonist's back. You're not a prison guard at all. You're just a simple monster. At this moment outside the prison, 3 people were secretly observing everything, watching the protagonist's performance inside. One of the girls was excited. That's him. He's the one I've been looking for. The man who had been about to act tough was instantly split in 2 by the protagonist. Just now the protagonist had finished dealing with the trash on the lower level. Soon after the warden approached to offer his condolences, and asked if the protagonist needed a break. However, the protagonist said no. Open the door immediately. Hearing this, the warden didn't hesitate any longer. But before that, she had one request for the protagonist. She hoped he could bring back any surviving guards from below. The protagonist wanted to know how many people were still alive on each level. However, the warden didn't know. Because starting from the underground level the communication devices were destroyed. Only the 5th level's equipment remained intact. It was as if the people inside wanted to be seen. After hearing this, the protagonist asked the warden to open the door. With the warden's command, the steel doors slowly opened to both sides. At this moment the warden warned the protagonist to be careful, cause the difference between the underground and the 1st level was like heaven and earth. Just as the door opened a small gap, the protagonist became serious, because there was already an ambush set up behind the door. They attacked mercilessly in a frenzy. Various abilities and projectiles were fired wildly. Seeing this, the warden was horrified. She called out to the protagonist. But in the next moment a prisoner appeared right in front of her. He grabbed her by the neck and lifted her high into the air. "So you're the warden here? This is perfect. We've caught a big fish." Admiring her figure, the prisoner turned back and called to his fellow inmates. "Hey guys, this is the warden here. Come on, get in line and get to work." At that moment he exuded the manner of a leader. However, when he looked behind him, he froze stunned in place. In that brief instant, all he saw was devastation. He looked up in disbelief. And there he saw the protagonist already standing on top of his head. In the next moment the protagonist delivered a powerful punch. The impact sent the warden flying through the air. As for the man, his remains were scattered everywhere. The protagonist looked down at the warden lying on the ground. "Don't follow me anymore. It's dangerous." The warden stammered a response. "Understood." As the protagonist prepared to leave, the warden called out to him again. She had one last thing to say. Criminal, Fumu, captured by hero, Tome, is in the solitary cell on the first floor. The protagonist replied coldly, "I know." Then he turned and walked away. Meanwhile, in the solitary cells underground, the remaining prisoners had all gathered there. Hearing the constant explosions outside, they prayed for their fellow inmates' success. But their hopes were soon crushed mercilessly. One of the women was a former hero. She had defeated 28 heroes in battle. She had no respect for the brainless fools around her. Her arrogance quickly angered one of the brutes. "Do you want to die?" But the woman seemed to find his words amusing. "A bunch of trash. Have you ever defeated a real ability user?" The man, now enraged, activated his ability. The man exuded a strong sense of power. But as they say, looks can't last for long. In the next second he was instantly split in half. The woman had already transformed. Her hair and claws became extremely sharp. When she was a hero she had taken down many bad guys. She also discovered a method to deal with SS ability users. Moreover, she knew the protagonist's powers. So the woman invited the others to cooperate. She could share the method for hunting SS ability users with them. Meanwhile, the three outside the prison watched the protagonist's performance. The little girl was quite impressed. Just a while ago she had been interested in the white-haired guy. She had even used an electromagnetic pulse to save him. One of the men raised a concern. "That person is a hero, he's of no use to us." The little girl excitedly replied that was the old him. Now he doesn't even resemble a hero. Despite that, the other two said you can only choose one. After all, polygamy is illegal. Hearing this, the little girl seemed troubled. This is really hard to decide. In that case, the one who survives in the end will be the one destined for me. I really am a genius. Seeing the protagonist about to take action, Fumuki began to share information about him. She had once been an experienced hero herself. At this moment the purple-haired man Subichi raised a question. Even if we know his abilities, what good will it do? After all, he is a member of an alliance composed of rank 1 heroes. And the strongest person here is only rank 3. Fumuki smiled confidently. Of course she knew this. Ever since Hero Rosa became the head of the alliance, she initiated a reform for the heroes. First, she redefined what it meant to be a hero, and stopped heroes from fighting bad guys with sulfur monosulfide level abilities. Second, she regularly had the heroes team up for cooperative training. Finally, she abolished the hero ranking system from rank 1 to rank 5. The reason Fumuki was explaining all this was because when the protagonist joined the RL Alliance, the ranking system had already been abolished. He had no notable achievements to speak of. As a result, rumors spread that he had an affair with Rosa. Despite that, he could still instantly deal with all the prisoners on the first floor. Meanwhile, none of the people here could even reach rank 2 hero level. Unexpectedly, Fumuki grinned. The first floor is just full of small fry. Even you guys could easily handle them, couldn't you? Here anyone you meet is carrying the weight of thousands of lives. They're completely incomparable to the people on the first floor. Of course, Fumuki emphasized that this doesn't mean they're weak. It's just that she knows their weaknesses. After the emergence of superhumans hundreds of years ago, scholars classified them into 3 categories. Physical enhancement abilities that strengthen the body, creation abilities that can conjure things out of thin air, and special abilities that don't fall into the first 2 categories. Fumuki believes she found the protagonist's weakness because she had witnessed his training. He has a fatal weakness. He simply doesn't dodge. As a result, the remaining prisoners all chose to join the plan to deal with the protagonist. They first sent a group of prisoners to attract the protagonist's attention. When the protagonist saw them, the first thing he did was give them a choice. Wear the collar or BS. Fumuki and Subichi observed the battle remotely via brainwave communication. And as Fumuki expected, the protagonist didn't dodge the attack at all. The reason he didn't dodge was because there was simply no need to. So Fumuki mixed a little surprise into this attack. It was a set of ability suppression devices taken from the guards. Even a rank 1 hero would have their powers sealed. After wearing just 15 of them, to be extra cautious this time, they prepared 30 devices. The plan was proceeding smoothly. With the help of a special ability user, all the devices were placed on the protagonist. The prisoners began to cheer, nearly popping champagne to celebrate. But what they didn't realize was that Fumuki's plan had 3 fatal flaws. First, the protagonist's strength was beyond expectations, far exceeding what a rank 1 hero should be capable of. He shattered all the suppression devices with sheer force. Sensing the danger, Fumuki quickly ordered the second plan: take the guards on this floor as hostages. But the second flaw was the protagonist's abilities. He possessed both physical and special abilities. With a single gesture, black flashes filled the air. The prisoners were taken out instantly, while the guards remained unharmed. His precision was terrifying. Realizing the situation was hopeless, the third flaw became clear. The protagonist wouldn't give them a second chance. At this point, aside from the 2 in the rear, everyone else on this floor had been executed. At this moment, Tsubichi was completely terrified. He angrily questioned Fumuki beside him. "This is nothing like what you promised." The man kept ranting incessantly. Meanwhile, Fumuki was doubting her own judgment. How could 30 devices not work at all? Listening to the endless noise beside her, Fumuki finally lost her temper. She exploded with rage, transforming and clawing the man to death. "What garbage! You dare to yell at me?" Even after venting her anger, she couldn't calm down. "If you're so powerful, why aren't you fighting on the front lines? Does that make sense? This doesn't make any sense at all." Suddenly a chilling sound came from behind her. She turned her head. It was the prison guard she had been using as a cushion, trying to sneak away. "You're asking for death." Realizing she had spotted him, the prison guard, terrified, burst into tears and screamed for help. Fumuki stared at him coldly, slowly raising her claws. But in the next moment, her claw was severed from her body. Fumuki stared in disbelief at her severed arm. She slowly turned to see the protagonist standing behind her. Her interest in the escaping guard vanished entirely. The protagonist looked at her coldly. "Hero Fumuki, or should I say criminal Fumuki, do you have any last words?" Fumuki clutched her severed arm and burst into wild laughter. Damn it, this is really the end. She recalled how her sister had once thought of her as a reliable hero. That belief had set her on the path of heroism. But the first thing her sister did after awakening her powers was personally send her to the execution prison. Once Fumuki had felt pride in her sister's dependence on her,